In the agora at Athens, in the latter half of the 3rd century before our era, a thin man with sloping shoulders is bent over a wax tablet, and the boys passing by call him by the nickname the city has given him, which means simply the column, because his neck inclines forward as though weighted by what he carries in it. He has come to philosophy late, after losing his inheritance to confiscation, after running long distances as a trained athlete, after sitting at the feet of Clynthes and finding his teacher slow. He is writing at this moment a sentence about a cylinder rolled down a slope, and the sentence will be quoted, argued over, and partially preserved for more than 2,000 years, though the book it belongs to will be lost almost entirely. His name is Chrysippus of Soli, and the question he is trying to answer is the oldest and most uncomfortable question philosophy has ever asked. If everything that happens has been determined by what came before, if the chain of cause stretches unbroken from the first motion of the cosmos to the gesture of your hand reaching for a cup, then in what sense is anything you do your own? The Stoics had insisted against the atomists that fate governs all. The Stoics had also insisted against the fatalists that virtue is in our power and that praise and blame are deserved. To hold both of these at once requires an account, and Chrysippus, sitting at his tablet in the agora, was building one. Let us reflect on what he built. The principle we are considering tonight has no neat single name in the surviving fragments, because the surviving fragments are themselves so few. What we have of Chrysippus is mostly quotation by others, by Cicero, by Aulus Gellius, by Diogenes Laertius, by Plutarch, writing against him. Of the 705 books he is said to have written, none has come down to us whole. We are reading him through keyholes. What he taught, in essence, is this: every event in the cosmos is fated. The cause of every event lies in what preceded it, and that chain has no gap. But causes are not all of one kind. There are external causes which strike upon a thing, and there are internal causes which belong to the thing itself, to its nature, to what the Greeks called its own quality. When a stone is thrown, the throw is the external cause, but the stone falls because it is the kind of thing a stone is. When a cylinder is placed at the top of a slope and given a push, the push is the external cause, but the cylinder rolls rather than slides or tumbles end over end because of the shape that belongs to it. Change the shape and the same push produces a different motion. The push does not determine the rolling. The push initiates a motion the cylinder's own nature carries out. So it is, Chrysippus argued, with the human soul. An impression strikes the mind. A sight, a sound, a piece of news, a remembered grievance, the smell of bread, the face of an enemy. The impression is the push. It comes from outside, and you did not choose it, and you could not have prevented it from arriving. But what happens next? The assent, or the refusal, the judgment that this is to be pursued, or this is to be feared, or this is nothing at all. This happens because of what you are. The motion that follows the impression is the motion of your character. It is fated, yes, in the sense that given this impression and this character, no other response was going to occur. But it is yours, because the character is yours, and the cylinder rolls as cylinders roll. The Latin form of the doctrine survives most clearly in Cicero's treatise on fate, where he reports the analogy with care. Cicero writes, and I give you the older English rendering, that as a cylinder cannot begin to roll unless it is pushed, but once pushed, it rolls of its own nature, so the impressions that strike the mind do not determine the assent that follows them, though they prompt it. The Greek term Chrysippus used for what the cylinder does of itself was the term for its own motion, its proper motion, the motion that belongs to it because of what it is. Here then, the structure of the teaching. Fate is real. The push is real. You cannot prevent the impression from arriving, but the assent, the inner motion that follows, is the expression of your character, and your character is what you have made and are making by every previous assent. The chain of cause runs through you, not around you. You are not a stone the cosmos pushes about. You are not a god outside the chain who chooses freely. You are a cylinder. You roll as you are shaped to roll. And the work of philosophy is the shaping. This is the principle: fate, assent, and the shape of character. We will now spend some time with the man who taught it. Chrysippus was born in Soli, a town on the southern coast of Asia Minor, somewhere around the year 280 before our era, though the date is uncertain by a few years in either direction. The town itself gave its name to a kind of imprecise Greek, the word solecism, which has come down to us as the term for a grammatical mistake. And there is a small irony in this, because Chrysippus would become the most relentlessly precise logician of antiquity. He came to Athens, we are told by Diogenes Laertius, after his father's property was confiscated, and the loss seems to have been the turning of his life. He had trained as a long-distance runner. He had expected, perhaps, a settled inheritance. Instead, he came to the city to study, and he attached himself to Cleanthes, who was then the head of the Stoic school. And Cleanthes was a former boxer and water carrier who had succeeded Zeno of Citium, the school's founder. The school was not a building. The Stoics took their name from the painted porch, the Stoa Poikile, which was a public colonnade on the north side of the agora, decorated with paintings of the Battle of Marathon and the sack of Troy. Zeno had taught there because he could not afford a hall, and the practice continued. The early Stoics philosophized in the open, among the noise of the market, among shoppers and slaves and foreign traders, in a city that had long since lost its political independence to Macedon and would soon lose it to Rome. Athens in the 3rd century was no longer the Athens of Pericles. It was a university town and a memory. Chrysippus, by all accounts, was difficult. He quarreled with Cleanthes. He left the Stoa for a time and studied with the academic skeptics, learning their methods of argument, which he then turned back against them when he returned. He was said to be so confident in his own dialectic that he remarked, "Give me the doctrines, and I will find the proofs myself," a remark that has survived because his contemporaries found it arrogant, and Cleanthes, by report, was wounded by it. Yet he returned to the Stoa, and when Cleanthes died, around 230, Chrysippus succeeded him as the school's 3rd head, and it is under Chrysippus that Stoicism became the philosophical system we recognize, the system that would later shape Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. There is an ancient saying, preserved by Diogenes Laertius, that runs, "If Chrysippus had not been, there would have been no Stoa." The school, as a coherent doctrine, with its logic and physics and ethics interlocked, is largely his construction. Zeno gave the seed. Cleanthes preserved it. Chrysippus built the system around it, defended it, against every objection the Academy and the Peripatetics and the Epicureans could mount, and wrote his hundreds of books on logic, on the soul, on fate, on the passions, on providence, on the gods, on the criteria of truth. The books are gone. We know their titles from Diogenes' catalogue, which runs for pages. We know their arguments from hostile summaries and friendly quotations. We have Cicero, who half a century after Chrysippus's death studied his works and reported their conclusions. We have Plutarch, who wrote a treatise specifically against the Stoic positions and quoted Chrysippus in order to argue with him. And we are grateful to Plutarch in the way one is grateful to an enemy who happens to have saved one's letters. We have Galen, the physician, who quoted Chrysippus on the passions in order to disagree with him about the seat of the soul. We have Aulus Gellius, the Roman antiquarian, who preserved the cylinder analogy in a Latin paraphrase of striking clarity. Of Chrysippus's personal life, we have only fragments. He never married. He dedicated his books, we are told, not to kings or patrons, but to fellow philosophers and students. He lived modestly. He ate at the table of a woman named, in one tradition, Aristocreon, who was his patron and friend. He died, according to one of the more cheerful biographical anecdotes of antiquity, of a fit of laughter after watching an ass eat figs from a silver dish and remarking that one should now offer the ass some unmixed wine to wash the figs down. Whether the story is true matters less than the fact that the ancients chose to tell it about him. They thought of him as a man who saw absurdities clearly and was not afraid of laughing at them. He was around 73 when he died, in the year 206 or thereabouts. So picture him, a man who has lost his inheritance and become, by sheer relentless argument, the architect of the most influential philosophical system in the Mediterranean. A man who teaches in a colonnade, surrounded by the noise of commerce, in a city living in the long shadow of its former greatness. A man writing 700 books in defense of the proposition that the cosmos is rational, that fate is real, that virtue is possible, and that these three claims do not contradict one another. A man working out, with the kind of patience that only a former long-distance runner could bring to a problem, the analogy of the cylinder and the slope. This was his circumstance. Now consider how the principle functioned within it. The doctrine of fate in the Stoic system is not a melancholy concession. It is a description of the cosmos as the Stoics understood it. The cosmos is a single living thing, animated by a divine reason, the Logos, which is identical with Zeus and identical with the active principle that orders matter. Every event is an expression of this reason. There are no accidents, no events that fall outside the chain. The Stoics, in this, were closer to certain religious traditions than to the atomists, who held that the universe was a play of swerving particles. For Chrysippus, the universe was a thought thinking itself, and every motion in it was the motion of that thought. This is a grand and somewhat terrifying picture. If everything is fated, the obvious objection, raised in antiquity by the academics and raised again in every century since, is that human action becomes meaningless. Why should I deliberate if my deliberation is already fated? Why should I be praised or blamed if I could not have done otherwise? The ancient name for this objection was the lazy argument, the argos logos. The argument runs, if it is fated that you will recover from this illness, you will recover whether or not you call the doctor. And if it is fated that you will not recover, you will not recover whether or not you call the doctor. And therefore, in either case, calling the doctor is pointless. Chrysippus answered the lazy argument with what he called co-fated events. The calling of the doctor is itself fated, together with the recovery. It is not the case that the recovery is fated independently of the means. The means and the end are woven together in the chain of cause. To say it is fated that you will recover is to say it is fated that you will recover by means of calling the doctor, taking the medicine, resting, and the rest. The means are not separable from the outcome. The argument is lazy because it imagines two independent threads. There is only one thread. This is the same structure you will notice that the cylinder analogy expresses. The push and the rolling are not two independent events that happen to coincide. They are one event in which the external cause and the internal nature of the thing produce together the motion that follows. So with deliberation, so with calling the doctor, so with the assent of the soul to an impression. The cosmos works through you. You are not bypassed. Chrysippus seems to have applied this teaching to himself with a certain austerity. We have a fragment, preserved in Epictetus's discourses, in which Chrysippus is quoted as saying, in effect, that if he knew it was fated for him to be ill at this moment, he would even be moving toward the illness, for the foot, if it had understanding, would walk into the mud, because that is what feet are for in the order of things. The fragment is severe and a little strange, and Epictetus uses it to teach that the wise man does not merely accept what happens, but assents to it, takes it up, makes it his own. The illness is not something done to you against your nature. The illness is something done to you within a nature that includes mortality, vulnerability, and embeddedness in a larger order. But notice what this does not mean. It does not mean that Chrysippus taught passivity. It does not mean that he taught indifference to the means by which one lives. He wrote books on ethics, on what to do, on the duties one owes to parents, friends, the city. He wrote books on the passions, in which he argued that the passions are themselves errors of assent, mistaken judgments about what is good and bad, and that they can be corrected by clearer thinking. The whole project of Stoic ethics presumes that the shape of the cylinder can be worked on. You are responsible for the rolling because you are responsible over time for the cylinder. This is the crucial move, and we should slow down here. The character through which fate runs is not a fixed thing handed down to you at birth. It is, in part, the deposit of every previous assent you have given. Every time you have judged that a thing was worth pursuing, every time you have assented to anger, every time you have refused to assent to envy, every time you have practiced patience or failed to practice it, you have shaped the cylinder. The next impression that arrives will be met by the cylinder you have become. This is why the Stoics took the discipline of attention so seriously. They believed that the inner motions of the soul were not trivial. They were the slow carving of the shape that fate would run through next. Cicero, in On Fate, presses the analogy carefully. He distinguishes between perfect and principal causes on the one hand, and proximate and auxiliary causes on the other. The impression is an auxiliary cause. It contributes, but it does not determine. The principal cause of the assent is the character of the assenter. This distinction allowed Chrysippus to maintain that the assent is in our power, while also maintaining that the ascent is fated. It is fated because it follows necessarily from the character and the impression together. It is in our power because the character that produces it is the character we have made and continue to make. There is, in the surviving fragments, an austerity to all of this that does not flatter the reader. Chrysippus is not telling you that you are free in the sense that the moderns sometimes mean by freedom, a freedom to have done otherwise, a freedom to step outside the chain of cause and choose against your nature. He is telling you that you are free in a different and harder sense. You are free in the sense that what you do is genuinely yours, because it expresses what you are, and what you are has been shaped in part by what you have done. Freedom, on this account, is not a gap in the chain. It is the chain running through you in such a way that it is your motion. The Stoics later, particularly Epictetus, would develop this into the discipline of assent, the careful examination of impressions before agreeing to them. Do not be carried away. Look at the impression. Ask what it really is. Ask whether the thing presented is in your power or not in your power. Ask whether the judgment the impression invites is true. This discipline is the daily work of shaping the cylinder. It is what the Stoics meant by training. It is what they meant by philosophy as a way of life rather than a body of doctrine. And Chrysippus, the patient logician in the colonnade, the man writing his 700 books, was building the framework within which this daily work made sense. The framework had to hold two truths at once. The cosmos is governed by fate. Your ascent is your own. The cylinder rolls down the slope because it was pushed, and the cylinder rolls down the slope because it is a cylinder. What, then, is the lesson the cylinder teaches? The first thing it teaches is that the impression is not the ascent. Something arrives at you, a piece of news, a pain, an insult, a craving. The arrival is not yet your action. The arrival is the push. What happens next, the motion that follows in the soul, is the rolling, and the rolling is yours. The Stoics insisted on this gap between impression and assent, and they insisted that the gap was the whole of moral life. If you collapse the gap, if you treat every impression as a command, you have surrendered the only thing that was ever yours. The second thing it teaches is that you cannot avoid the push. The world will come at you. Bad news will arrive. People will speak ill of you. Your body will fail in ways you did not choose. Your plans will be disrupted by causes you did not initiate. To live is to be pushed. The Stoics did not promise that the push would stop. They promised rather that the push is not the rolling, and that the rolling is where you live. The third thing it teaches is the most demanding. The shape of the cylinder is not given, it is worked. Every assent you have ever given has contributed to the cylinder you now are. Every assent you give today contributes to the cylinder you will be when the next push arrives. There is no neutral moment in which you are merely waiting for life to happen to you. You are always, by every small motion of judgment, becoming the thing that will respond to what comes next. The Stoics took this with extraordinary seriousness. They believed that a life lived well was a life in which the cylinder had been carefully shaped by long attention, by the correction of mistaken judgments, by the practice of virtue in small matters as well as great. This is a strenuous teaching. It does not let you blame the push for the rolling. It also does not let you treat your current shape as fixed. It places the work of becoming squarely in the daily, in the small ascents, in the moments when an impression arrives, and you have, for a brief and decisive instant, the chance to examine it before agreeing. There's a fourth thing the cylinder teaches, and it is the most subtle. It teaches that freedom and fate are not opposites. The cylinder rolls down the slope freely, in the sense that it rolls according to its own nature, and it rolls fatedly, in the sense that given the push and the shape and the slope, no other motion was possible. To insist that freedom requires a gap in the chain, a moment when you could have done otherwise against everything you are, is to misunderstand what freedom is. Freedom is not the absence of cause. Freedom is the presence of your own nature, fully expressed in what you do. The wise man knows this. He does not strain against the chain. He works on the cylinder. He attends to his assents. He examines his impressions. He asks, when something arrives, what it really is, and whether the judgment it invites is sound. He builds, slowly, the shape that will roll well when the next push comes. And when the push comes, as it will, he does not resent it. He does not pretend it did not come. He notes that it came, and he allows what follows to be the motion of his own shape, and he calls this his life. Chrysippus did not promise that this would be easy. He did not promise that you would always succeed. He wrote books on the passions because he believed the passions were precisely the moments when the cylinder rolled badly, when the assent was given hastily, when the judgment was mistaken, when grief or anger or fear carried the soul along motions that did not belong to its right nature. The passions, for the Stoics, were not feelings to be suppressed. They were mistaken assents to be corrected. The work was to assent better, not to feel nothing. There is a kind of dignity in this teaching that does not appear at first glance. It refuses to treat you as a victim of what happens to you. It also refuses to flatter you with a freedom you do not possess. It tells you, with the patience of a logician working at a wax tablet in a noisy agora, that you are embedded in a cosmos you did not choose, that you are pushed by impressions you did not invite, and that what you do with the push is, nonetheless, your own, because it is the motion of the shape you have made and are making. The cosmos runs through you. You are not bypassed. You are also not exempt. You are a cylinder, and you are at work on the cylinder, and the slope is always under you. We end, then, with a question. When the next impression arrives, the next piece of news that strikes against the wall of your attention, the next remembered slight that surfaces while you are trying to sleep, the next craving, the next fear, the next small invitation to assent, what shape will the push find? What have you been making in the smaller sense of the past months and years that will roll forward now into the world? Have you been attending? Have you been examining the impressions before agreeing to them? Have you been correcting the judgments that have led you astray? Have you been practicing the patience, the moderation, the courage, the justice that the Stoics named as the virtues, the proper shapes of the well-made soul? These are not questions you are meant to answer quickly. They are not questions with neat answers. They are questions to sit with, as Chrysippus sat with his wax tablet, working out across many afternoons how the cylinder rolled and why. Consider, before you sleep tonight, one impression that arrived in your day and one assent you gave to it. Consider whether the assent was the motion of the cylinder you would wish to be, or whether it was the motion of an older shape one carved by judgments you no longer hold but have not yet replaced. The shape is not fixed. The work continues. The push will come again tomorrow, and the cylinder you bring to it will be, in some small part, the cylinder you have shaped tonight. Chrysippus died, we are told, laughing at an ass eating figs from a silver dish. It is not a bad image to carry away. A man who had spent his life writing 700 books in defense of the proposition that the cosmos is rational, dying in laughter at a small absurdity in a city that had outlived its empire, having taught his students that the push is not the rolling and that the rolling is theirs. We are told he was buried by his patron Aristocreon, who set up a statue to him in the Ceramicus. The statue is gone. The books are gone. The cylinder remains.